Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Carlos Reads the Bible. In today's episode, we're going to read from Genesis chapter 4, which also tends to be, I know I say this every time, but it's a very good chapter. Genesis is such a good book. But before you do, let me encourage you to watch the introduction, because in the introduction of Carlos Reads the Bible, I talk about how I'm reading the Bible. It's really important that we agree on the method of reading the Bible. And also, let me encourage you to read chapter 4 before you actually listen to me. Because it's a good idea to read the whole thing first in context. It makes more sense. Let's begin. Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived, and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. Just going to stop there to say that I love the way the Bible uses know as they had sexual intimacy. So Adam knew Eve, and then she conceived and bore Cain. And I love how she says, Eve says, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord, which is consistent with the rest of the Bible that says that children are a blessing from God. So she understood, even though she didn't have the Bible, even though, I mean, she did know God from the garden, so I guess she kind of knew a little bit about him. But I just find that, I like that. I like the fact that she is recognizing that children are a blessing because God helped her to have children. And then again, she bore the brother Abel. And there's some people who think that they were twins. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Does it really matter? Maybe. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. And then you know that Abel was a keeper of sheep and Cain was a worker of the ground. And that will be interesting in a moment. That's that information. Verse 3. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. Verse 4. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. Verse 5. But for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. Verse 6. The Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? Verse 7. If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Now here we get to the meat of this first part of Genesis chapter 4, because here we're talking about an offering. So Cain brought an offering to the Lord in the course of time. And in the course of time, it could mean a couple of things. It maybe means that it was on a Sabbath. Maybe it means that just after some time, right? But the point is that he brought an offering to God of the fruit of the ground, because he works on the ground. And Abel brought an offering, firstborn of his flock, and of their fat portions, which is like the choicest, the greatest, the best part of the fruit of his labor. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain his offering had no regard. So Cain was very angry. But anyway, I want to make a point about the offering situation here, because from the beginning, they already understood that there was a God that was worthy of giving offering. It's interesting, atheism was, I mean, obviously Adam and Eve knew God, so obviously they passed their knowledge to their children. But as the world, as people spread out on the earth, everyone was religious. They all had a religion. They all offered things to some sort of God, either to God, the real God, or to some deformed version of God. Atheism is a thing of now. We were made to be worshippers of God, or at least of a God, but definitely of God. That's how we're made. We're made to have a relationship with God. We're made for that. And even today, people who are atheists, their life and their ideology, it mirrors a religious ideology. It's really interesting. I'm reading a book about socialism and how socialism started. And they used to have, that's even before Marx and Engels, when they met, before they met, there were other experiments, and they used to have this church kind of thing of reason and in socialism, where they would go and sing, and they would go and read, and they would go and have fellowship. And it's amazing how even in the writings of Marx and Engels, they hated religion, they hated God. But if you read their stuff and if you understand what they're saying, it mimics religion. It mimics so much, because we are all made to worship God. And the people who don't will end up worshiping other things, and will end up giving offering to other things, whether people, whether money, whether ideas, ideologies. And if you're not focused on God, you're going to end up worshiping something else or someone else. But now back to the really interesting thing here. I think it's interesting that the Bible says that the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain, his offering had no regard. No regard whatsoever. So God looked at Abel and his offering positively, but to Cain, he didn't, right? And Cain got really angry. And Cain got really angry, not just angry at Abel, but he also got angry at God, because God didn't pick him, but he picked his brother. It's a very dangerous thing to get angry at God. This is the beginning. This is the first, well, not first story of sin, because Adam and Eve sinned, but this is it's a very interesting, significant story about sin, because it shows that being angry at God will lead to sin. As God even said, why are you angry? If you do well, we will not be accepted. But if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. So the moment you're angry at God, you're going to do something bad. And here's the thing. Why did God like Cain's offering better? Maybe it was the intentions of his heart. Maybe it's because God preferred an animal sacrifice instead of fruit of the ground. But the point is, God had a preference, right? And of course, it says that Abel gave the best, while maybe Cain didn't, right? Maybe his intentions were better. But the thing is, that's how God decided what was better. He didn't prefer Abel because he liked Abel more. He preferred Abel because Abel did something that God preferred, that God liked. A lot of people think that don't like what God wants. You know, God sets the commandments. This is what I expect from you. This is why I want from you. And some people don't want to do it. So they get angry at God. And they're like, well, this is not fair. This doesn't make sense. I want to do this. Why are you telling me I can't do this? Of course, the Bible is not a book of rules, but also it's a book of rules. Yeah. And a lot of people rebel against God because they don't like the way God set the world. The thing is, it's not for us to like. It's for us to obey. Whatever God says, it's not for us to decide, oh, I like this and I don't like that. That's what Cain did. Don't be like Cain. Don't be like Cain. You just bow down your head and say, yes, sir. Yes, God. Yes, Lord. And you obey. Unless, of course, you don't want to please God and you don't want to live a life, a godly life. And then, of course, that's up to you. But God created the universe. He set the laws of the universe the way He wanted. He didn't ask anyone. He didn't ask for anyone's opinion. He just decided. And He preferred Abel's sacrifice for various reasons. Whatever reasons don't really matter. He just preferred his sacrifice. Not because of Abel, but because of what he did. Right? But Cain was not very happy. He was angry. He was angry at Abel. He had envy, and he was angry at God, which really is the crux of the situation here. And then he says this, and if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. This is very similar to chapter 3, verse 16, when God curses the woman and says, your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. It's an interesting comparison. I'm not saying that, I don't know what you make of it, but it sounds the same, right? It's a same literary structure. And here is the thing about sin. We all have this nature that wants to do what's contrary to what God wants us to do. And it's our job to rule over it. It's our job to have self-control and choose and decide to rule over it. If we don't do it, we do that at our own peril, as Jordan Peterson would say. Verse 8. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? Verse 10. And the Lord said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. We'll stop there. Let's just talk a little bit about this. You can see that it was a premeditated murder because Cain went to speak to Abel and probably just waited for the right time to kill him. Really bad. Really, it was an accident. He went there. We don't know why he spoke to Abel. We have no idea. The Bible doesn't say. But we know that he went there to speak to Abel and then killed him. And then God came to him and asked, and he said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? Which indicated that, well, first, he lied to God, right? He knew he had done something wrong. Kind of like what Adam and Eve did. So, and this was before God said anything about not murdering, anything about any commandments, anything about anything. He already realized that he had done something wrong. And that's why we know that a life is very precious to God. Because, well, first, it was created in God's image, as we can see in chapter 2. But also, from the beginning, humans already had that instinct, that conscious, you can say, that he was wrong. But he did not show any remorse. Because he was not like, I'm so sorry I did this. But he was like, I don't know. Why do you care, God? And he was probably still angry at God anyway by this time, right? And then God said, your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And it's interesting because Cain was a worker of the ground. And there's this whole thing about the ground here, as we're going to see in verse 11. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Verse 13. No, let's stop there. Yeah, so Cain was a worker of the ground. The ground was already cursed because of Adam anyway. But here it's doubly cursed because now Cain cursed the ground with his brother's blood. And that's a pretty bad punishment from God there. And wander on the earth. Verse 13. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Verse 14. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Verse 15. Then the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. Verse 16. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord, and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So here we can see the punishment that God gave him, which was basically two things. Was working the ground, which was his job, wouldn't yield as much as he used to. Just give me a second. Now the lighting's a little bit better in my face. Wasn't as good as you used to. So it was the ground was cursed again. But also a greater punishment was that he was driven from his face, from God's face. He walked away from God. And you can see that in all his generation, that will be the theme of his generation. But God put a mark on him so no one would kill him. Why did God do that? Maybe because he wanted people to multiply. Maybe because he found some mercy. Who knows? But we don't know what that mark is. It's probably a visible mark because it needed to be very, how would people know? And then he went and built a city. He settled, so in the land of Nod. Now, verse 17. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, there you go, that's when we talk about he built a city. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Verse 18. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mehujael, and Mehujael fathered Methushael, and Methushael fathered Lamech. Verse 19. And Lamech took 2 wives. The name of one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. Now we're going to see in chapter 5 that there's also people named Enoch, and there's also people named Lamech, but there's a different Enochs, and there are different Enochs and different Lamechs. Okay? And again, the whole thing about Cain knew his wife, the whole knowing, which is interesting. And that Jesus uses later when he's talking in Matthew chapter 7, I think, when he's talking to the people who thought they were Christians, who preached and performed miracles in his name, and Jesus said, I don't know you. Not that he didn't know as in, I don't know who you are, because of course Jesus knows, or God will know in the day of judgment. He will know who those people are, but they have no intimacy with God. What a tragic thing to be doing things in the name of Jesus, in the name of God, and get to heaven, just to get to heaven, spend your life doing that, just to get to heaven, and be sent to hell. Better know God. Yeah. Anyway, back to Genesis. And then we go back to Lamech. Again, the generation of Cain, who was away from God, who killed Abel. And Lamech already started by taking 2 wives, which is not how God intended marriage to be, because marriage was between a man and a woman, not a man and 2 women, not 2 men and a woman, but a man and a woman. And here we have Lamech already doing the wrong thing, because, well, he came from that generation. Back to verse 20. Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. Verse 21. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who played the lyre and pipe. Verse 22. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. I find it interesting that the Bible is talking about, this is right in the beginning. Just remember this is right after Adam and Eve, and they're already building things and making things. How did they learn this stuff? Who knows? Maybe the angels taught them. Maybe I'm just making things up. Although in chapter 5 and with chapter 6, we're going to see some interesting stories about angels in a moment, in 2 episodes. But just saying, how do they know all this? But the interesting thing is music. Music is such an interesting thing because there's no evolutionary reason for music. None. Nothing. Music is this thing that really does something to people, right? I mean, you've experienced, I like, people who like music, everyone likes music to some extent. Why? Isn't that amazing that God will create music just like that? Just like that. And he came from a generation of terrible people. Aren't we all terrible? But again, there's no evolutionary explanation for music. It's an amazing thing. Verse 23. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. Here again, this terrible generation, the guy kills a man because the man wounded him. That's a bad retribution. That's why when the Bible later on, it says a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, it's because people before that, I know today, in today's, when Jesus comes and say, you heard what was said, a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, but I say, if someone makes you walk a mile, you walk a second mile. If someone hits in the face, let him give him the other side. And we think, oh, what a terrible morals, these people, one a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye. But in the past, before God gave Moses that specific law, people would just kill each other. because they hit you in the face instead of hitting the other person in the face. So it was unequal punishment for things, just as Mr. Lamech here thinks. And then here he goes delusional, because this is not God saying, this is him saying. If Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. Why does he think that? I don't know. They are lost. They are from a bad, sinful generation. And now we go to verse 25. And Adam, back to Adam now, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son, and called his name Seth, for she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. Verse 26. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. The end of chapter 4. It's a terrible story that ends with a generation of sinfulness and sin and destruction. But at the end, God gives Eve another son, Seth. And in his generation, they start calling upon the name of the Lord, which is a good thing. It's a very good thing. So there you go. There was Genesis chapter 4. It was short and sweet. The beginning really is the part that is the most interesting and impactful. Hope you're enjoying this. If you do, now you can watch this on IGTV on Instagram, but you can also listen as a podcast. So if you do listen as a podcast, or even if you don't, please go, and also on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, please go on whatever you listen to podcasts and leave me a rating, because that will make the podcast go up in the ratings and ranks and stuff, and other people will hear it, which would be great and quite embarrassing to me 5 years from now when I know more about the Bible and I realize, oh my gosh, what did I say? But that's it for me today. Thanks so much for watching, listening, and I will see you tomorrow whenever. I'll see you the next time with Genesis chapter 5. Bye.